The Norse Voyages into Lustria in 888 IC. The Norskans are seafarers of unmatched skill. Only the mariners of the High Elves could be argued to be their equals in sailing and navigating the turbulent seas of the Old World. Since the age of Sigmar, they have had a well-established seafaring tradition, and their longships are suited to even the longest voyages. Exploration is a trademark of the Norse tribes, and it is often said that discovering and conquering new lands brings great favor with the dark gods, for to do so is to extend the banner of chaos far and wide. Exploration also brings great personal glory, and the halls of Norscan warriors rock with the songs of men who sailed to distant shores, saw distant lands, and slew and enslaved their inhabitants. Though the High Elves had long attempted to block the rise of any other naval power in order to maintain their mastery of the sea, the Norse quickly broke through their blockades of the great western oceans. Amongst these raiders in particular was the infamous champion Losterikson, who was the first human to cross the great ocean and discover the long-forgotten land of Lustria, the infamous jungle realm now known to be the domain of the cruel lizardmen. Losterikson had learned of the western land by questioning High Elven captives. The Norsemen were fortunate to find that the land they had discovered was not a savage primeval waste, but that a fabulous temple stacked with gold and riches lay not far from their landing. The barbarians ransacked the great temple, plundering it of all riches and slaying whoever stood in their way, roaring their blasphemous battle cries as they did so. The resulting riches made every participant of the raids immensely wealthy, and longships returned to Norsca laden with gold and plunder. As word got out in the north of the great riches to be found in the New World, many more marauders began to join forces with Losterikson to raid the lands of the Dragonfolk, as the Norskans came to refer to the Lizardmen. These successful raids eventually culminated in 888 IC with the establishment of the outpost of Skegi, named for Losterikson's daughter, the first child of the Old World to be born in the New. It was not only greedy raiders whom Losterikson had brought with him as he rampaged throughout the coastlines of Lustria, for the Norskans, being fierce men of the far north, carried always with them the names of their dark gods in their hearts. A power not felt in Lustria for many centuries was now stirred once more, and the meditations of the Slan mage priests became deeply troubled as the echoes of the Old One's disastrous war against the coming of the dark powers reverberated in the minds of one mage priest to the next. They now faced the dreadful possibility that chaos was abroad in the world once more, its standard carried in the warlike souls of the Norse. Though a mighty champion of chaos, Losterikson was wise enough to avoid direct battle with the Lizardmen. though his descendants would later prove to lack their forefathers' wisdom. More impetuous champions of his time also proved less far-sighted, and also attempted to penetrate further into Lustria's interior. None were ever seen again. One of the more reckless warbands, however, returned from a rather profitable raid on the inner cities, carrying with them hundreds of pounds of gold and a relic of apparently great value. Nostarixon realized their misstep when a massive horde of lizard folk streamed out from the jungle and besieged Skeggi. Nostarixon ordered the settlement's gold to be thrown over the ramparts to the lizards, knowing that they had only come for their precious relics. The lizard folk took that which the warband had stolen and quickly departed the settlement with nary a backward glance. And so the settlement survived and prospered. Far from dissuading the NORSCANS from making the journey to Skeggi, this merely enticed more warriors of chaos to sail from frozen Norsca to the warmer climes of the south, for the promise of battle is just as tempting to a Norseman as the bright lure of gold. In time, the Chaos Champions of Skeggi sailed back to their homelands, bringing tales of the horrors they had overcome and the profit they had made, causing scores of longships to sweep down and begin raiding the land of the Old Ones. By 954 IC, hundreds of Norse warhordes attempted invasions of the continent, seeking to conquer it for the glory of the gods. The first of these was the raid of Alec Fellclaw, whose horde of Norse marauders marked the first full-scale chaos invasion of Lustria since the fall of the Old Ones. Though his horde was driven back on their longships to the sea, they had succeeded in plundering vast amounts of treasure, and the survivors returned to their tribes as wealthy men indeed. The invasions of BRETONNIA. In 947 to 2421 IC. Orgulous and grim, the Norsemen would not give, for they sought glory or deaths in the eyes of their bloody gods. The 10th Great Battle of Gilles le Breton and his companions. Though Bretonnia is relatively farther from the Chaos Wastes than the Empire, it has nonetheless suffered mightily from the depredations of Norse raiders, who have ever sailed down its rivers to spread destruction and suffering upon the Lady's realm for countless generations. Indeed, the Norskans have raided the lands of Bretonnia since at least 947 IC, more than 30 years before the establishment of the Bretonnian kingdom by Gilles le Breton in 997 IC. It was the attacks of Norscan marauders that led to the extinction of the northern Bretonnie tribes in 947 IC, their attacks isolating those tribes from each other and ravaging their lands utterly. The Norse raids are the most common along the northern dukedoms of Longueuil and Lyonesse, and the constant shadow of Norscan attacks has made the knights of those lands more battle-hardened than most. Thus, the knights of more southerly dukedoms hold the resilience of their northern compatriots in high esteem, and commend them for their efforts in withstanding the Norse invaders. Indeed, all Bretonians know well to fear the Northmen, for beyond their inhuman strength and merciless brutality, the fact the Norscans so willingly tread the path of darkness and openly revel in their damnation is what terrifies the pious folk of the West above all. On certain occasions, the armies of Norsca succeed in breaking through the defences of the north and raiding deep inland into the southern dukedoms, such as Couronne. In 2007 IC, Réponse de Lyonesse led her knights to war against the mighty Norscan chaos horde of Karan the Blighted, and succeeded in routing them from the land, though roughly half of all the knights of Bretonnia perished in the conflict. In 2521, Norscan longships once again began raiding northern Bretonnia, setting countless villages in Lyonesse and Couronne to the torch. One of the most notable instances of a Norscan raid upon Bretonnia is the great raid of Swengar of the Scalings, who attack the great elven-built city of Longwy during the days of Gilles the Uniter. The history of Bretonnia, related by Adelron of Couronne, narrates the coming of the great Norse warhorde. Thousands of warriors, augulous and grim, thirsting for death or glory in the eyes of the great gods, fell upon the city like wolves upon sheep. Gilles le Breton and his companions, riding triumphantly from their previous victories, were aghast to come upon such a terrible sight as the warriors of chaos besieging their realm. Clad in fur and hell-forged steel, the Norsemen met the Bretonnians in tempestuous battle. Paying no heed to their own safety, the Norsemen did not back down from the fight and overcame the Bretonnian defenders. In desperation, Lord Marcus of Bordelot threw down his knightly gauntlet and challenged Swengar to single combat. "Find victory, or take leave," he cried. Swengar, filled with the martial pride of the Norse, could not refuse the challenge, and ascended to the highest tower in order to face the Bretonnian in single combat. Many thousands had already fallen to the whirlwind fury of Swengar's hammers, and he was happy to see Marcus' resolve remain unshaken before him. With a guttural war cry, the Jarl faced the Bretonnian lord, their battle lasting for a full day and night, and the elements themselves arcing down from the blackened sky to lend even greater might to Swengar's blows. Alas for the Norsemen, Marcus found renewed strength with the breaking of dawn's light and found an opening in the barbarian warlord's defense, striking a mighty blow that cleaved him in two, sending his corpse down to the sea's watery embrace. Honoring their chieftain's oath, the Norsemen drew up their anchors and unfurled their sails to return to their icy homeland. This was not to be the last of the Norscan raids on Bretonnia, nor even at all the most terrible. Centuries later, Swengar's descendants, the Jarls of the Scaling tribes, most illustrious among them, Egil, Styrbjorn of Strovengard, would unleash terrifying devastation upon the lands of Luen-Leoncoeur. The War in the Mountains. From 2302 IC to 2390 IC. In the aftermath of the failed invasion of the Kurgan Asavar Kul, Valmir Aisling rose up to fill the void left by the fallen ever-chosen, and declared himself Emperor of Chaos. Such was Valmir's might and power that few contended his grandiose claim. A ruthless and efficient leader of men, brooding and silent save for the occasional and invariably fatal burst of terrifying anger. High King Valmir held a reputation as an uncompromising and bloodthirsty warlord, punishing even the smallest act of cowardice or insubordination with the most brutal tortures he could devise, and hated all non-Norsemen with a terrible passion. To Valmir, the Norse dwarf hold of Krakadrak was an aberration, a canker that had to be torn out with extreme prejudice, for the dwarven citadel had nestled in the northern mountains that he counted as his ancestral homeland. The warlord had striven previously to destroy this blot upon his territory, but had failed when the dwarven defenders had not only weathered his initial attempt to take the hold, but also succeeded in forcing Valmir's armies out of the mountain passes. Incensed by this, Valmir swore vengeance against High King Silverbeard of the Norse dwarves, and began drawing up plans for a second invasion of Krakadrak. Valmir launched his new invasion at the height of the Norscan summer, a time only slightly less lethal to mortal creatures than the rest of the bleak year, but far more conducive to military campaigning than the terrible Norse winter, for he knew that the heavy snows and blizzards of that season would have served only to slow down his hardy Northman warriors and aid the perfidious dwarven defenders. Valmir gathered tribes of bloodthirsty Norse chaos warriors into 2 great warbands and sent them on a grueling climb over the crests of the mountains, while their fellow tribesmen kept the Krakadrak throngs occupied. The Norse champions fell upon the dwarven gatekeepers from above and poured their still living bodies into the molten heart of the mountain. It was to this that Valmir unveiled the next phase of his ambush, as the mountain valley echoed with the soul-shattering roars of bestial creatures who had been kissed by the favor of Chaos's dark lords. Packs of mutated chaos spawn, feral forsaken, and yet more horrifying beasts that defied easy explanation thundered into the pass, a terrible horde of unclean monstrosities that no son of Grugni had ever seen washed over their defensive positions. With iron courage, the stout dwarves withstood the bestial advance and fought back, beginning a methodical slaughter of the chaos beasts that choked the narrow mountain pass with corpses. Valmir could well afford these losses, for even as the Norse dwarves disposed of the chaos beasts, his elite warriors were inside the hold, continuing their own butchery. The dwarves were thus drawn into a war of attrition that they could not win. In the guttering light of the labyrinth honeycombing the dwarf peak, the Huskarls of Valmir Aisling did battle with the mighty iron breakers of the dwarves, the passageways echoing to the sound of jagged chaos blades bashing against Gromril plate. Eventually, however, the iron breakers themselves were cut down. More and more dwarves charged out from their barracks to meet the Chaos Warriors, but they fared no better, and soon the whole of the dwarven underworld was like some nightmarish afterlife of Norscan myths, a terrible smith that forged only heroes quenched in blood. Outside in the Icicle Pass, the dwarves were faring far better, managing to hold against Valmir's armies. In the skies above, what few gyrocopters the Norse dwarves possessed attempted to bring news of this surprise assault to the outlying Norse dwarf halls. The skies shook with the blood-curdling roar of a demonic beast, and so did a winged crimson figure sweep down and smash the strange craft asunder. None other than Agask, demon prince ally of Valmir Aisling. Truly, the Norse High King had planned this battle well. Below the aerial duel, Silverbeard had set his oath stone and announced his intention that he would not flee from the battlefield, preferring death to dishonor. The loud cracking of a whip and bestial growls announced the arrival of Valmir himself, taking to the battlefield upon his mighty chariot pulled by 6 hideous and skinless bears. Mighty Valmir rode up to Silverbeard and threw his battle tally at the Dwarf King's feet, a massive handful of the decapitated dwarf heads. Incensed by this affront to his people's honor, Silverbeard roared out his challenge to the Norseman. All around, warriors of either faction, Norse and dwarf alike, held their breath. Long did this duel last, even as the war for the mountain raged all about them. Fully thrice the size of the Dwarf King, Valmir rained blow after earth-shattering blow down upon him, who weathered the assault with astounding resilience. Then, without warning, Valmir stepped back from Silverbeard's oath stone and tilted his head as if hearing something. His great beard parted with an evil grin as the sound of galloping hoofs grew louder and louder. Suddenly, the valley began to fill with the sounds of slaughter and the harsh shouts of dying dwarfs. Valmir's allies from beyond Troll Country had arrived, precisely as bidden, galloping into the rear of the dwarven army with crushing force. Caught between the bulk of Valmir's bloodthirsty infantry and the sledgehammer blow of the charging Chaos Knights at the rear, the dwarfs were swiftly cut down and trampled into the snow. Realizing there was but one recourse remaining, Silverbeard gave the order for the wrath of Grimnir to be stoked. With a boom that split the skies like the vengeance of the dwarf god himself, the enormous cannon unleashed its payload. Its target not the Chaos Horde, but the sheer sides of the mountain pass itself. With great, ear-shattering booms, the mountains fell down in great slabs of rock, thundering down in a cataclysmic avalanche that engulfed Norsemen and dwarfs alike. Silverbeard's last sacrifice, which had served to spare the green lands of the south from Valmir's deadly attentions, had also sealed the fate of Kraka-Drak. For in the dark depths of the mountains, Valmir and his Huskarls fought on, grimly and methodically slaughtering the dwarf folk who had thought themselves safe. Though it took many decades of bitter fighting, Valmir and his closest followers had succeeded in wiping Kraka-Drak from the annals of history. Albeit posthumously, the Emperor of Chaos had fulfilled his oath.